The Adventures of Pinocchio. By Carlo Collodi. Chapter 32. Pinocchio's ears become like those of a donkey. In a little while he changes into a real donkey and begins to bray. Everyone, at one time or another, has found some surprise awaiting him. Of the kind which Pinocchio had on that eventful morning of his life, there are but few. What was it? I will tell you, my dear little readers. On awakening, Pinocchio put his hand up to his head and there he found. Guess. He found that, during the night, his ears had grown at least 10 full inches. You must know that the marionette, even from his birth, had very small ears, so small indeed that to the naked eye they could hardly be seen. Fancy how he felt when he noticed that overnight those 2 dainty organs had become as long as shoe brushes. He went in search of a mirror, but not finding any, he just filled a basin with water and looked at himself. There he saw what he never could have wished to see. His manly figure was adorned and enriched by a beautiful pair of donkey's ears. I leave you to think of the terrible grief, the shame, the despair of the poor marionette. He began to cry, to scream, to knock his head against the wall, but the more he shrieked, the longer and the more hairy grew his ears. At those piercing shrieks, a dormouse came into the room, a fat little dormouse, who lived upstairs. Seeing Pinocchio so grief-stricken, she asked him anxiously, "What is the matter, dear little neighbor?" "I am sick, my little dormouse, very, very sick and from an illness which frightens me." "Do you understand how to feel the pulse?" "A little." "Feel mine then and tell me if I have a fever." The dormouse took Pinocchio's wrist between her paws and, after a few minutes, looked up at him sorrowfully and said, "My friend, I am sorry, but I must give you some very sad news." "What is it?" "You have a very bad fever." "But what fever is it?" "The donkey fever." "I don't know anything about that fever," answered the marionette, beginning to understand even too well what was happening to him. "Then I will tell you all about it," said the dormouse. "Know then that, within 2 or 3 hours, you will no longer be a marionette, nor a boy." "What shall I be?" "Within 2 or 3 hours you will become a real donkey, just like the ones that pull the fruit carts to market." "Oh, what have I done? What have I done?" cried Pinocchio, grasping his 2 long ears in his hands and pulling and tugging at them angrily, just as if they belonged to another. "My dear boy," answered the dormouse to cheer him up a bit, "why worry now? What is done cannot be undone, you know. Fate has decreed that all lazy boys who come to hate books and schools and teachers and spend all their days with toys and games must sooner or later turn into donkeys." "But is it really so?" asked the marionette, sobbing bitterly. "I am sorry to say it is. And tears now are useless. You should have thought of all this before. But the fault is not mine. Believe me, little dormouse, the fault is all Lampwick's." "And who is this Lampwick?" "A classmate of mine. I wanted to return home. I wanted to be obedient. I wanted to study and to succeed in school, but Lampwick said to me, 'Why do you want to waste your time studying? Why do you want to go to school? Come with me to the land of toys. There we'll never study again. There we can enjoy ourselves and be happy from morn till night.'" "And why did you follow the advice of that false friend?" "Why? Because, my dear little dormouse, I am a heedless marionette, heedless and heartless." "Oh! If I had only had a bit of heart, I should never have abandoned that good fairy, who loved me so well and who has been so kind to me. And by this time, I should no longer be a marionette. I should have become a real boy, like all these friends of mine. Oh, if I meet Lampwick I am going to tell him what I think of him and more, too." After this long speech, Pinocchio walked to the door of the room. But when he reached it, remembering his donkey ears, he felt ashamed to show them to the public and turned back. He took a large cotton bag from a shelf, put it on his head, and pulled it far down to his very nose. Thus adorned, he went out. He looked for Lampwick everywhere, along the streets, in the squares, inside the theatres, everywhere, but he was not to be found. He asked everyone whom he met about him, but no one had seen him. In desperation, he returned home and knocked at the door. "Who is it?" asked Lampwick from within. "It is I," answered the marionette. "Wait a minute." After a full half-hour the door opened. Another surprise awaited Pinocchio. There in the room stood his friend, with a large cotton bag on his head, pulled far down to his very nose. At the sight of that bag, Pinocchio felt slightly happier and thought to himself, "My friend must be suffering from the same sickness that I am. I wonder if he, too, has donkey fever." But pretending he had seen nothing, he asked with a smile, "How are you, my dear Lampwick?" "Very well. Like a mouse in a Parmesan cheese." "Is that really true? Why should I lie to you?" "I beg your pardon, my friend, but why then are you wearing that cotton bag over your ears?" "The doctor has ordered it because one of my knees hurts." "And you, dear marionette, why are you wearing that cotton bag down to your nose?" "The doctor has ordered it because I have bruised my foot." "Oh, my poor Pinocchio! Oh, my poor Lampwick!" An embarrassingly long silence followed these words, during which time the two friends looked at each other in a mocking way. Finally the marionette, in a voice sweet as honey and soft as a flute, said to his companion, "Tell me, Lampwick, dear friend, have you ever suffered from an earache?" "Never." "And you?" "Never." "Still, since this morning my ear has been torturing me." "So has mine." "Yours, too? And which ear is it?" "Both of them." "And yours?" "Both of them, too." "I wonder if it could be the same sickness." "I'm afraid it is." "Will you do me a favor, Lampwick?" "Gladly. With my whole heart." "Will you let me see your ears?" "Why not? But before I show you mine, I want to see yours, dear Pinocchio." "No. You must show yours first." "No, my dear. Yours first, then mine." "Well, then," said the marionette, "let us make a contract." "Let's hear the contract." "Let us take off our caps together." "All right. All right. Ready then." Pinocchio began to count, 1, 2, 3. At the word 3, the two boys pulled off their caps and threw them high in air. And then a scene took place which is hard to believe, but it is all too true. The marionette and his friend, Lampwick, when they saw each other both stricken by the same misfortune, instead of feeling sorrowful and ashamed, began to poke fun at each other, and after much nonsense, they ended by bursting out into hearty laughter. They laughed, and laughed again, laughed till they ached, laughed till they cried. But all of a sudden Lampwick stopped laughing. He tottered and almost fell. Pale as a ghost, he turned to Pinocchio and said, "Help, help, Pinocchio! What is the matter? Oh, help me! I can no longer stand up." "I can't either," cried Pinocchio, and his laughter turned to tears as he stumbled about helplessly. They had hardly finished speaking, when both of them fell on all fours and began running and jumping around the room. As they ran, their arms turned into legs, their faces lengthened into snouts, and their backs became covered with long grey hairs. This was humiliation enough, but the most horrible moment was the one in which the two poor creatures felt their tails appear. Overcome with shame and grief, they tried to cry and bemoan their fate. But what is done can't be undone. Instead of moans and cries, they burst forth into loud donkey brays, which sounded very much like, ha! 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 At that moment, a loud knocking was heard at the door and a voice called to them. Open! I am the little man, the driver of the wagon which brought you here. Open, I say, or beware. Chapter 33. Pinocchio, having become a donkey, is bought by the owner of a circus, who wants to teach him to do tricks. The donkey becomes lame and is sold to a man who wants to use his skin for a drumhead. Very sad and downcast were the two poor little fellows as they stood and looked at each other. Outside the room, the little man grew more and more impatient, and finally gave the door such a violent kick that it flew open. With his usual sweet smile on his lips, he looked at Pinocchio and Lampwick and said to them, "Fine work, boys. You have brayed well, so well that I recognized your voices immediately, and here I am." On hearing this, the two donkeys bowed their heads in shame, dropped their ears, and put their tails between their legs. At first, the little man petted and caressed them and smoothed down their hairy coats. Then he took out a currycomb and worked over them till they shone like glass. Satisfied with the looks of the two little animals, he bridled them and took them to a marketplace far away from the land of toys, in the hope of selling them at a good price. In fact, he did not have to wait very long for an offer. Lampwick was bought by a farmer whose donkey had died the day before. Pinocchio went to the owner of a circus, who wanted to teach him to do tricks for his audiences. And now do you understand what the little man's profession was? This horrid little being, whose face shone with kindness, went about the world looking for boys. Lazy boys, boys who hated books, boys who wanted to run away from home, boys who were tired of school. All these were his joy and his fortune. He took them with him to the land of toys and let them enjoy themselves to their heart's content. When, after months of all play and no work, they became little donkeys, he sold them on the marketplace. In a few years, he had become a millionaire. What happened to Lampwick? My dear children, I do not know. Pinocchio, I can tell you, met with great hardships even from the first day. After putting him in a stable, his new master filled his manger with straw, but Pinocchio, after tasting a mouthful, spat it out. Then the man filled the manger with hay. But Pinocchio did not like that any better. "Ah, you don't like hay either," he cried angrily. "Wait, my pretty donkey, I'll teach you not to be so particular." Without more ado, he took a whip and gave the donkey a hearty blow across the legs. Pinocchio screamed with pain, and as he screamed he brayed, "Ha! Ha! Ha! I can't digest straw." "Then eat the hay," answered his master, who understood the donkey perfectly. "Ha! Ha! Ha! Hay gives me a headache." "Do you pretend, by any chance, that I should feed you duck or chicken?" asked the man again, and, angrier than ever, he gave poor Pinocchio another lashing. At that second beating, Pinocchio became very quiet and said no more. After that, the door of the stable was closed and he was left alone. It was many hours since he had eaten anything and he started to yawn from hunger. As he yawned, he opened a mouth as big as an oven. Finally, not finding anything else in the manger, he tasted the hay. After tasting it, he chewed it well, closed his eyes, and swallowed it. "This hay is not bad," he said to himself. "But how much happier I should be if I had studied. Just now, instead of hay, I should be eating some good bread and butter." Patience. Next morning, when he awoke, Pinocchio looked in the manger for more hay, but it was all gone. He had eaten it all during the night. He tried the straw, but, as he chewed away at it, he noticed to his great disappointment that it tasted neither like rice nor like macaroni. "Patience," he repeated as he chewed. "If only my misfortune might serve as a lesson to disobedient boys who refuse to study. Patience. Have patience." "Patience indeed," shouted his master just then, as he came into the stable. "Do you think, perhaps, my little donkey, that I have brought you here only to give you food and drink? Oh, no. You are to help me earn some fine gold pieces, do you hear? Come along, now. I am going to teach you to jump and bow, to dance a waltz and a polka, and even to stand on your head." Poor Pinocchio, whether he liked it or not, had to learn all these wonderful things, but it took him 3 long months and cost him many, many lashings before he was pronounced perfect. The day came at last when Pinocchio's master was able to announce an extraordinary performance. The announcements, posted all around the town, and written in large letters, read thus: "Great spectacle tonight! Leaps and exercises by the great artists and the famous horses of the company. First public appearance of the famous donkey called Pinocchio, the star of the dance. The theater will be as light as day." That night, as you can well imagine, the theater was filled to overflowing 1 hour before the show was scheduled to start. Not an orchestra chair could be had, not a balcony seat, nor a gallery seat, not even for their weight in gold. The place swarmed with boys and girls of all ages and sizes, wriggling and dancing about in a fever of impatience to see the famous donkey dance. When the first part of the performance was over, the owner and manager of the circus, in a black coat, white knee breeches, and patent leather boots, presented himself to the public and in a loud, pompous voice made the following announcement: "Most honored friends, gentlemen, and ladies. Your humble servant, the manager of this theater, presents himself before you tonight in order to introduce to you the greatest, the most famous donkey in the world, a donkey that has had the great honor in his short life of performing before the kings and queens and emperors of all the great courts of Europe. We thank you for your attention." This speech was greeted by much laughter and applause. And the applause grew to a roar when Pinocchio, the famous donkey, appeared in the circus ring. He was handsomely arrayed. A new bridle of shining leather with buckles of polished brass was on his back, 2 white camellias were tied to his ears, ribbons and tassels of red silk adorned his mane, which was divided into many curls. A great sash of gold and silver was fastened around his waist and his tail was decorated with ribbons of many brilliant colors. He was a handsome donkey indeed. The manager, when introducing him to the public, added these words: "Most honored audience, I shall not take your time tonight to tell you of the great difficulties which I have encountered while trying to tame this animal, since I found him in the wilds of Africa. Observe, I beg of you, the savage look of his eye. All the means used by centuries of civilization in subduing wild beasts failed in this case. I had finally to resort to the gentle language of the whip in order to bring him to my will. With all my kindness, however, I never succeeded in gaining my donkey's love. He is still today as savage as the day I found him. He still fears and hates me. But I have found in him one great redeeming feature. Do you see this little bump on his forehead? It is this bump which gives him his great talent of dancing and using his feet as nimbly as a human being. Admire him, O signori, and enjoy yourselves. I let you, now, be the judges of my success as a teacher of animals. Before I leave you, I wish to state that there will be another performance tomorrow night. If the weather threatens rain, the great spectacle will take place at 11 o'clock in the morning." The manager bowed and then turned to Pinocchio and said, "Ready, Pinocchio. Before starting your performance, salute your audience." Pinocchio obediently bent his 2 knees to the ground and remained kneeling until the manager, with the crack of the whip, cried sharply, "Walk!" The donkey lifted himself on his 4 feet and walked around the ring. A few minutes passed and again the voice of the manager called, "Quick step," and Pinocchio obediently changed his step. "Gallop," and Pinocchio galloped. "Full speed," and Pinocchio ran as fast as he could. As he ran, the master raised his arm and a pistol shot rang in the air. At the shot, the little donkey fell to the ground as if he were really dead. A shower of applause greeted the donkey as he arose to his feet. Cries and shouts and hand clappings were heard on all sides. At all that noise, Pinocchio lifted his head and raised his eyes. There, in front of him, in a box sat a beautiful woman. Around her neck she wore a long gold chain, from which hung a large medallion. On the medallion was painted the picture of a marionette. "That picture is of me. That beautiful lady is my fairy," said Pinocchio to himself, recognizing her. He felt so happy that he tried his best to cry out, "Oh, my fairy! My own fairy!" But instead of words, a loud braying was heard in the theater, so loud and so long that all the spectators, men, women, and children, but especially the children, burst out laughing. Then, in order to teach the donkey that it was not good manners to bray before the public, the manager hit him on the nose with the handle of the whip. The poor little donkey stuck out a long tongue and licked his nose for a long time in an effort to take away the pain. And what was his grief when, on looking up toward the boxes, he saw that the fairy had disappeared. He felt himself fainting, his eyes filled with tears, and he wept bitterly. No one knew it, however, least of all the manager, who, cracking his whip, cried out, "Bravo, Pinocchio! Now show us how gracefully you can jump through the rings." Pinocchio tried 2 or 3 times, but each time he came near the ring, he found it more to his taste to go under it. The 4th time, at a look from his master, he leaped through it, but as he did so his hind legs caught in the ring and he fell to the floor in a heap. When he got up, he was lame and could hardly limp as far as the stable. "Pinocchio! We want Pinocchio! We want the little donkey!" cried the boys from the orchestra, saddened by the accident. No one saw Pinocchio again that evening. The next morning the veterinary, that is, the animal doctor, declared that he would be lame for the rest of his life. "What do I want with a lame donkey?" said the manager to the stable boy. "Take him to the market and sell him." When they reached the square, a buyer was soon found. "How much do you ask for that little lame donkey?" he asked. $4. "I'll give you 4 cents. Don't think I'm buying him for work. I want only his skin. It looks very tough and I can use it to make myself a drum head. I belong to a musical band in my village and I need a drum. I leave it to you, my dear children, to picture to yourself the great pleasure with which Pinocchio heard that he was to become a drumhead." As soon as the buyer had paid the 4 cents, the donkey changed hands. His new owner took him to a high cliff overlooking the sea, put a stone around his neck, tied a rope to one of his hind feet, gave him a push, and threw him into the water. Pinocchio sank immediately. And his new master sat on the cliff waiting for him to drown, so as to skin him and make himself a drumhead.